Okay, so 2.3, Pax Romana, right? Core question of the day, why is the Pax Romana considered to be one of the finest periods of world history? A lot of that has to do with the Hellenistic philosophy that we'll talk about towards the end. All right, but that is the primary focus question for today. So we begin with Octavian Augustus, right? Where we left off, right? You've got Marius saying that, hey, everybody should follow me, and then they do. So you have these people supporting their individual generals. Julius Caesar takes advantage of that. He uses his private army to seize complete control. And then he gets assassinated, and his nephew, who he adopts as his son and heir, Octavian, comes into play. Now, what did Octavian do? Right? Well, he defeated Mark Antony in the Civil War. Awesome. But what was Octavian's political genius? If we're looking at that first term, right? What did Octavian do that was so genius politically? Riley?
He basically achieved absolute power.
Okay.
With the consent of the Senate.
Okay, that's the key part, right? Julius Caesar achieved absolute power, but people hated him for it. Octavian does the exact same thing, but people love him for it. That's an incredible transformation, and it only happens about 7 years apart. So how did you go from this guy has absolute power, let's kill him, to this guy has absolute power, let's worship him, essentially? Right? He becomes the emperor for the next 47 years. Right? That's part of his genius, the ability to do that. Now, how does he do that? Luke? He refused to be called a king, right? What does he want to be called instead? Princeps. What does princeps mean, Cammy? First citizen. Why is that an important title?
Matt? Still a citizen.
You're what?
Is he still a citizen?
Exactly. It sounds like he's still a member of the community. Imperator, dictator, tyrant, emperor. These all sound like he's separate. He's above all of us, and he has complete control. Right? In 509 BCE, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was an Etruscan king. He rapes a patrician daughter. It's very famous artwork, actually. It's called the Rape of Lucretia, which is kind of a weird thing to focus on for art. But regardless, right, that permanently stamps the Roman mind against autocratic power. Now, that word autocratic, right, we need to define our terms, because essentially these are two very important terms in understanding Western civilization. We've already talked about that one a little bit. We haven't really talked about this one yet, but we're going to, and we will continue to do so throughout the rest of this course. All right, so aristocratic, what does aristocratic mean? And I would add this to your notes somewhere, just in general, right? But what does aristocratic mean? What is that word? What are some adjectives or synonyms, anything associated with aristocracy? Who are aristocrats? Right?
Great people.
Okay, they're wealthy. Typically, don't have to be, but they definitely are typically wealthy. What form do they have their wealth in most often? Like, what did the patricians own? Land, exactly. So they own land. They're landowners. That's immensely important. If you don't own land, you don't really have any power. That's like true all the way up until the invention of the internet. Okay, so if you think about like ancient Greece, right? In Athens, you have an aristocratic oligarchy. Who's in charge of that oligarchy? The landowners. Who are the patricians? Landowners. When we get to the Middle Ages, which we're basically kind of skipping, right? The church owns 1/3 of all of the land in Europe. The church is the most powerful institution during the Middle Ages because it's landowners. So landowning is a very important principle throughout all of human civilization, except for North America, pre-Columbus, because they don't have the same definition of owning land. It's more of like a you can use it rather than you own this part of it. Okay. What else? All right, let's think of it this way. If you're wealthy and you own land, you can still be a plebeian. Right? You can have wealthy landowning plebeians. What is the characteristic that makes somebody a patrician most of all?
In the government.
Well, you need to be an aristocrat to be in the government, but you don't have to be in the government if you're an aristocrat. You just have that privilege. Lisa?
Were they older?
Typically, yes.
I'm not so sure if that was
But you can, well, I mean, when you're born into aristocracy, so typically they do live longer, but at the same time, young kids are also aristocrats, yeah.
They have power.
They do have power traditionally. Why? What characteristic do they have? That's the core question. Understanding aristocrats. Like Julius Caesar is not wealthy. He owns a little bit of land, but he is a patrician. What quality does he have that makes him a patrician, Riley?
An education?
Well, typically we can associate that with the aristocracy. They typically would be the most educated, yeah.
Leadership.
Leadership skills inherent, yeah. But even more than that, yeah.
Social class.
Okay, what distinguishes you from your social class? Like, how do you know if you're a plebeian or a patrician?
The robes. You said?
Okay, so traditionally the way that they dress, right? But what if you just took a plebeian and dressed them up fancy? That doesn't make them a patrician, right? Okay, why? What's the difference? Yeah.
People that follow you.
People that follow, all right, we're kind of going around it. It's really, I think when I say it, it's going to be pretty self-evident, but I don't know how to ask the question to get us there. Okay, nobility, titles of nobility, your last name, right? You can't just give your last name to someone. Well, I mean, technically you can, but like, if you're a plebeian, you can be a wealthy landowner, but if you don't have a patrician last name, you are not a patrician, right? In the Middle Ages, you could be a really wealthy kind of peasant class person, but unless you have a king's last name, unless you have a prince's last name, you are not a noble. So that title of nobility is the core characteristic, right? Julius Caesar is a patrician not because he's wealthy. He's not wealthy until he conquers Gaul. Julius Caesar is a patrician because his last name is Caesar. Right? That's why he adopts Octavian as his son. He needs to give Octavian his last name, or Octavian cannot become a patrician and therefore cannot run the government. Right? So it's that title of nobility. Right? That's an important thing to associate with the aristocratic class. Without that title of nobility, you are not an aristocrat. Yes, ma'am, for sure.
Does Octavian's last name like originate with Augustus, right?
No, we'll talk about that in a second. That's a self-generated title.
Okay.
His name was Octavius. Is what?
That was confusing. They would like refer to him as Octavian and Augustus.
Yeah, it's kind of like calling Donald Trump President Trump or Mr. Trump or Donald. Like it all means the same thing. It's just like he wasn't born President Trump, but then he becomes the emperor and he gets this title president, and forever he'll be known as president. Augustus meant the venerable. So essentially Augustus is just a title of leadership where he self-appoints himself Octavian Augustus to try and show that like, oh, I'm really a good person. Like, you should believe in me.
All right.
Also, you asked a question a few weeks ago and I actually looked into it and I never got back to you on it, but how do they know that people are slaves? I always found this interesting, and we have a little bit of time because there's not too many terms for today, right? That's a really good question, right? And they actually didn't signify. They didn't have some sort of outward symbol of who is a slave and who is not a slave. There's a direct reason why, because they didn't want the slaves to know how many slaves there were in society. If you had like a red robe for slaves and then you walk around and there's red robes everywhere, it's like, holy crap, maybe we have more power than we think. Maybe we can revolt against them. So what the typical thing is, you just got to think of the parochialism of the time, because nowadays, like everybody can do business with everybody, right? Back in the day, if you move to a city and people don't know who you are, they're not going to do business with you. So it's more based on like people who were enslaved just kind of understood that there really was nothing that they could do, and they never really tried to revolt other than like specific revolts that they sort of like Spartacus has one.
Yeah.
But that was a really good question. I found that interesting to look into. All right, anyway, so let's go back. Aristocratic, right? Wealthy landowners typically must have title of nobility. That's the absolute key. You must have a title of nobility. What does autocratic mean? Not automatic, but autocratic. What is an autocrat? Riley?
Guessing the plebeians.
The what?
The plebeians.
Not necessarily. It's a different form of power. So in aristocratic government, the nobles have power. Who has power in an autocratic government? Matt? I don't know. That would be more democratic.
One person.
Exactly, one person, right? And what type of power do they have? We can just make a guess or understand, Jake?
Absolute.
Absolute, all right? That's the key. It's an absolute, they have whoever, all right, an autocratic government has absolute power. Now, you can have different forms of autocracies, meaning you can have an aristocratic autocracy where the aristocrats have absolute power, right? You can have an individual autocracy where one person has absolute power. You can have a democratic autocracy where everybody has absolute power. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but technically, conceptually, you could, right? So autocratic simply means absolute power. Now, this is the big change. Octavian transitions Rome from an aristocratic oligarchy into an individual autocracy, and nobody has any idea. That's an incredible move. It's not the fact that he did it, it's the fact that he hid it. That kind of rhymed, but that's essentially what it is, right? It's not the fact that he did it, it's the fact that he hid it, right? He disguised his efforts. We talked about princeps. That means first citizen. One of the important things about the title princeps is this is evidence of how he did it. Like, how do you convince everybody to give you complete control, absolute power, in a government that doesn't really want to, where the patricians run everything? Yeah.
You forgot to ask an absolute.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Absolute power. Absolute power. I'm not really sure what that means. Absolute. All right, so absolute power. Okay. Big ideas here. Okay. He transitions and he disguises the transition from the patricians have power to one person has power. Okay. Now he does purge the Senate. Right? Have you guys ever heard of or seen The Purge, the movie? Right? Okay. What does it refer to? Jake?
Oh, they were like killing people. Or
Yeah, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're purging their society. You kill them, you get rid of them. That's what Octavian does to the Senate. If you disagree with him and he knows you disagree with him, he kills you. Literally, he killed all of the senators that disagreed with him and replaced them with senators that agreed with him. Now that in and of itself is not a genius move. But to do that and then on top of that say, all right, now that we have a Senate that completely agrees with me, hey guys, I want to give up power. What do you think the response is going to be? Right? Like, no, you shouldn't give up power. You should keep power. Oh, I tried. Right? It's a genius move because he demonstrates that he's willing to give up power, but the reality is he's not at all. Right? This is part of the way that he camouflages this transition. Right? He purges the Senate. He asks to give up power, and then of course they're going to say no because it's all of his supporters. It makes sense. But it's part of the genius of Octavian. Now, once he has power, right, the accomplishments of Octavian Augustus, what does he do once he has power? Right?
It talked about like all the things that he did for the army, which like basically strengthened it.
Okay, strengthen the army. Right? Why would you focus on reforming the army? Right? One of the things that he does is he promises the land that was like he gives the land that was promised to the soldiers. Right? He follows through on that promise. Why would you do that? Jake, what do you think?
Oh, he gets loyalty.
He gets loyalty, right? Why is that important? So there's not a mutiny, right? Remember what we talked about last week. The loyalty of the soldiers shift from Rome to their individual soldiers. Octavian figures out a way to get that loyalty back. So he solves the problem of people not caring about Rome, right? On top of that, he also commissions Virgil's Aeneid, which is just a book that's written to try and increase civic patriotism. You guys ever heard of the Hunchback of Notre Dame? Okay, the reason that story was written was to save the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Victor Hugo went around for like 3 years before he wrote the book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He went around and he like had these lists. It was like 30 pages of information about the cathedral. And he'd be like, look, this is really interesting. Look, this is really interesting. We should save the cathedral. And everybody's like, Victor, nobody cares. Because nobody cares about like non-emotional data, right? You could show somebody rationalized data and it's not gonna affect them emotionally. Then he has the clever idea, right? My goal is to save the cathedral. How do I save the cathedral? I have all this information, but people don't care. How do I make people care about it? What if I wrote a fictional story about somebody that lived in the cathedral? So all of a sudden he comes up with this Quasimodo character, and Quasimodo walks in front of the stained glass, and in the book he spends 3 pages describing the stained glass. And then he does this, and he goes to the bell tower, and then he talks about the bell tower for 5 pages, right? He basically details all of the information that he had, but he puts it into a story. And because he makes people care about the characters, he makes people care about the cathedral. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is the only reason that we still have the Cathedral of Notre Dame to go and visit to. Right? I mean, they're currently doing the restoration after the fire, but like the reason it was saved is because of Victor Hugo's book. He made them care about the characters. And because they cared about that, they cared about the cathedral. Octavian does the exact same thing. He commissions an author, Virgil, to write one of the greatest works of Latin literature. And by writing the Aeneid, by making them care about those characters, he makes people care about Rome. So he solves the problem of the Republic in the sense that people don't care about Rome, I'm going to make them care about Rome. Right? People aren't working together, I'm going to make them work together. And last but not least, what's that third problem? Well, the city-state government's too small. The institutions that they have don't work for this New World Empire. So I want to make it work. Right? Big idea coming out of Octavian's accomplishments. The Roman emperor did not create the Roman Empire. Octavian did not create the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire created the need for a Roman emperor. So the emperor did not create the empire created the emperor. If you can kind of keep that straight, that's an important concept to understand, because that's what it means when we're talking about the city-state institutions are too small to govern this New World Empire. Right? Their New World Empire creates the need for a new emperor. So if we're looking at the accomplishments of Octavian Augustus, okay, he transitions Rome from an aristocratic oligarchy to an autocratic or an individual autocracy, an individual imperial autocracy. Okay. He also sets up Rome into the Pax Romana, right? He basically creates the conditions of the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana is considered to be one of the finest periods of world history, and we'll take a look at that and kind of why towards the end of class when we're done with the dynasties first, and then into next week even, right? But one core idea, this is the main accomplishment of Augustus. He solved the problems of the Republic. Now there's a bunch of details as to how he does that and what does he actually do, but that's the core idea. He solves the problems of the Republic. All his 3 main problems, it collapsed in on itself because of those. Octavian solves those problems. So if you guys are looking at the key terms sheet, or just your key terms if you have them in your notes in general, right? There's kind of 3 main sections to today's reading. The first being that top left, Augustus and the foundations of the Roman Empire, right? So Octavian's political genius, princeps, and the accomplishments of Octavian Augustus, those 3 are kind of one category, right? And the main idea coming out of that, really you can boil it down to 2 main ideas, right? Is he disguises the transition to an emperorship, and then he solves the problems of the Republic. That's 2 big accomplishments. He disguises it, and he solves the problems. Right? And the disguise is absolutely crucial because Julius Caesar attempted to solve the problem, but because he didn't disguise his transition, he was assassinated. Octavian learns from this, disguises it, and then is able to successfully do what Julius Caesar wanted to do and probably could have done had he not been assassinated. You know what the most amazing part about this is, though? Octavian was between 17 and 19 years old when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Like, you guys are like 15, 16, right? Can you imagine in 2 years you become the leader of the most dominant world? Can you imagine, like, 2 years from now when you graduate high school, you become the president of America? And not only do you have to make decisions, but you make some decisions that basically set up America for 200 years of prosperity. That's what we mean when we say political genius. This isn't just like, oh, he got lucky. This is an Einstein level IQ in a young man who in his early 20s sets up Rome for one of the greatest periods in world history. That's political genius. Okay. Now, moving on, let's move into the Pax Romana dynasties. So you got the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the Flavian dynasty, and to be quite honest with you, there's only one main idea that comes out of that, right? What did the Julio-Claudian dynasty do? What did they accomplish? Luke?
They set up the system that allowed like the previous emperor to like choose the next one.
Almost, that's Nerva. We'll get to that. You're absolutely, that is important. Right? That is very, very important, but we're not there yet. Before Nerva, what did the Julio-Claudian dynasty accomplish yet?
Everybody accomplished basically killing
Who?
Julio Claudian.
So Julio-Claudian just refers to the lineage, meaning Julius Caesar through Claudius, and then Claudius's nephew Nero becomes the new. So essentially what happens is you have Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar adopts Octavian. Octavian becomes the next emperor, right? Or officially the first emperor of Rome. Octavian's nephew Tiberius is in power when Jesus is crucified. Tiberius is a semi-okay ruler, a little bit brutal, right? Tiberius then, it passes on to his relative Caligula, okay? Caligula is, I wish we had time to go over the Julio-Claudian dynasty in depth because they are so fascinating. They're psychotically insane. It's awesome to watch. If you're really interested in Roman emperors, or if you're interested in just psychology, look at the Julio-Claudian dynasty, right? This is a brief example. Here's two things that Caligula did, right? Number one, he named his horse president of Rome. Not exaggerating. He literally named his horse the Council of Rome. Now, part of that doesn't mean he's necessarily insane because he did it as an insult to the Senate. He thought the Senate was so stupid that you shouldn't be in charge. And Caligula was like in his early 20s, late teens. So he named his horse president of Rome. Number two, he ordered his troops to attack Poseidon. What is Poseidon the god of?
Order.
Water, right? The sea. How do you attack the god of the sea? Well, this is what they did. They lined up on a beach in full armor. And they brought out their shields, they grabbed out their gladius swords, and they started marching into the water, swinging their swords, attacking the god of the sea. And then they drowned because they're wearing metal armor, and they just walked into the middle of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Yeah. What? Right? Yeah, I love the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So we get to Caligula, all right? He's a little bit crazy. Eventually, Caligula is assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, which is essentially the Roman Secret Service. Which is like insane. Can you imagine that? The Secret Service is like so fed up with Donald Trump that they just walk up to him. They're just like, you are done, right? That's literally what happened. Multiple times actually throughout Rome's history, the Praetorian Guard would assassinate the emperors that they didn't like. It's like, oh, we're meant to protect you. Yeah, you kind of suck though. Cut his throat, right? And then in a Hollywood style story, the reason that they picked Claudius is because they found him quivering behind a curtain. So can you imagine, like, the Praetorian Guard is literally stabbing Caligula, and in the next room in the corner, Claudius is like, oh, I don't want to die, right? And his feet are sticking out from underneath. I'm not joking, like, this is all 100% true, right? His feet were sticking out from underneath the curtain. The Praetorian Guard goes in there, they're killing everybody around that area, and they find Claudius cowering and whimpering in the corner. And they're like, ooh, maybe he'll do what we want him to do. Let's make him emperor, and then we can control him. So they do. They make that guy emperor, the quivering coward, right? And Claudius is notoriously socially awkward. Like, he drools a lot and spits and has a lisp. And it's like, oh, this is kind of weird, right? But at the same time, like, they feel that they can manipulate him. So he is an intelligent leader, but he never actually accomplishes that much. Okay, so Claudius lives to eventually be assassinated, right? Nero's mother wants her son Nero to be in charge. So she mixes up some poisoned mushrooms, puts it in a soup, and then Claudius eats the soup, and then he's kaput. Right? So now we get to Nero. Right? Nero is my personal favorite emperor. Favorite's probably not the word that I should have used. My personal most interesting emperor of all time. For several reasons. Number one, he didn't think of himself as an emperor. He thought of himself as an artist, as an actor. Okay. The thing that finally did Nero in is a pretty good demonstration of that. But just like, none of this really matters. I don't write any of this down. I just find it interesting that you have a long line of people who are crazy. Okay, Nero thinks of himself as an actor, not as an emperor. Now he wants to read the play, the Iliad, right, that Homer came up with. Well, in the Iliad, the Troy burns after the Trojan horse comes in. The Spartans set Troy on fire. So he wants to read that part of the play. But he's unhappy. He's like, this background sucks. Like, that's not a city on fire. I want a real background. So he sets Rome on fire. And then he reads a play while Rome is burning in the background. And then everybody's like, Nero, what are you doing? You shouldn't set the city on fire. He's like, oh, it wasn't me, it was the Christians. And then they start persecuting Christians. Like, literally, for like the next 150 years, they persecute Christians because Nero was like, no, it wasn't me, it was them. Right? That. Okay? On top of that, he then goes on and is acting, right? He gives a speech and he gives a performance, and he happens to drop the talking stick, which is like, oh my God. Like, it's like doing something bad with the microphone. You just drop the microphone accidentally, right? He gets back to his house later that night. His wife is talking to him about it. He's like, you know what, Nero, that was darn near perfect. Right? That was almost perfect. It was awesome. If only you didn't drop that stick. And Nero's like, did you just criticize me? I'm a freaking emperor. You don't criticize me. And he grabs a stick and beats his wife to death. Okay? That's the start of the story. A few years later, 6 years go by. He's at a party. Gets a little drunk. He's looking over at the other side of the room. He's like, oh my God, that slave looks like my wife. I want that slave to be my wife. Problem. The slave's a guy. How do you make a guy your wife? Right? Little snip, snip, little burn, burn, and all of a sudden, for the next 8 years, he walks around parading this male slave. Hey, look at my wife, isn't she awesome? 100% true, that actually happened. These guys are insane, right? Eventually, Nero's run out of power because he goes to the Senate meeting, and this is his plan of attack. They have a bunch of invaders that are going to come attack his army, and he's like, all right, Nero, what are we going to do? You're the leader of the military. What are we supposed to do? He goes, here's my plan. I'm going to walk out onto the battlefield. I'm going to weep. I'm going to cry so hard that the people over there are going to feel so bad that they hurt me so as their leader. They're going to feel so bad that they hurt me that they're just going to put their swords and shields down, and they're going to come and join us. And then I'll sing them a song. And the song, because my voice is so beautiful, will reach inside them, grab a hold of their hearts, and turn them back to our side. And everybody is looking at them the exact same way that you're looking at them right now. You're out of your mind. This is insane. There's no way that that's going to work. And so they run him out of power, and eventually he commits suicide. He stabs himself in the jaw. End of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Now you have 3 emperors that try to fight for power during the year after that. One of them gets killed by the Praetorian Guard, one of them dies in battle, and one of them commits suicide. Enter Vespasian. Vespasian comes in, starts the Flavian dynasty. All right? Vespasian builds the Colosseum, and he builds it as a tribute to the people. All right? Nero seized the land underneath this. This used to be patrician-owned land. He claimed that land and turned it from private property into public property. And the patricians were kind of mad at him. So in order to try and be like, all right, we're all on the same side, Vespasian builds the Colosseum as a public building on that public land to try and show the people, I'm on your side, we're all in this together. Okay. Vespasian dies, his son Titus takes over. Titus really has an insignificant reign. What happens, the only thing that happens during his reign that's significant is Mount Vesuvius erupts and Pompeii and Herculaneum are destroyed or preserved. And then Domitian takes over, and Domitian is killed by the Praetorian Guard because, again, he's a horrible ruler. So what did they actually do? Nothing. Nothing of significance. Vespasian built the Colosseum. That's about it. What they did is they didn't mess it up. They preserved the achievements of Octavian. So it's not that they took it into new areas. It's that they were ineffective, but they didn't cause the collapse of Rome. So they preserved the achievements of Octavian. That's what that refers to. That's, I believe, a direct quote from your textbook. They preserved the achievements of Octavian, right? So that's what that means. They didn't mess it up. Yes, ma'am.
What was going on with like Judea and stuff?
So Judea would revolt all the time because they're monotheistic, right? And just to put it into perspective, like Caligula ordered a statue of himself, like a 60-foot gold statue, be placed in the temple at Jerusalem. Now, the temple of Jerusalem to the Jews at this time is like, that's where God was born. Like that's literally Moses took us here, and that's our holy land. You're telling me that you are going to put, no, that's not okay. And then they revolt against it. But that happens again when Hadrian comes along, and then there's a third Jewish revolt. But they're all suppressed because the Romans are unbelievably effective fighters.
Do they have like any importance, like with what we're going over?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Although they will have importance in the fact that Christianity eventually comes from that. But really, I mean, that's the only significance, is that one guy was nailed to a tree, and eventually he impacts the rest of human history. Right? Why? Because of the Roman Empire, though, not because of the Jews. Yeah, the Jews served a purpose in the fact that Pompey defeated them, and then Hadrian defeats them. But yeah, that's really about it. So if you're looking at the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties, okay, they're not remarkable leaders. They're kind of ineffective, but they preserved the accomplishments of Augustus. They didn't mess it up too bad. That's the big idea. Okay, all right, moving on. Let's take a look at Nerva now. And Luke, what did Nerva do?
Nerva created a system where the previous emperor gets to pick his successor.
Okay, so why is that a good idea? Why is,
I'm sorry.
no, by all means, I
Then
just,
you can keep like the good like trend of like good emperors, because one good emperor is probably gonna pick another good one.
okay, so you preserve this tradition of picking good leaders, right? The problem, I guess the best analogy I could give you, the problem with allowing your son to become the ruler is it's like rolling the die. If you happen to roll a 6, maybe you get a Trajan, right? Maybe you get an Antoninus Pius. What if you roll a 1 through 5? If you roll a 1, you get a Nero. You roll a 2, you get a Caligula. You roll a 3 or 4, maybe you get a Titus or a Domitian, both ineffective. Why would you chance it? Right? Nerva's like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. After Nero after Domitian is ousted by the Praetorian Guard, the Senate appoints Nerva. So the Senate picks their best leader. He becomes the new emperor. He kind of realizes this doesn't make sense. Why are we rolling the die? Why don't we just pick up the die and set it to 6? Right? Why do we choose the next person to be in charge? And that works. 5 for 5, right? 5 good emperors, the 5 best emperors. Trajan, who is Nerva's selection. So it goes Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Right? So Nerva picks Trajan. Trajan, by his contemporaries, and for hundreds of years afterwards, even till today, is considered the best Roman emperor of all time. Okay? After Trajan, Trajan expands the empire to its greatest extent. You have Hadrian. Hadrian begins the invasion of Britain. None of that's really important, but here's the big idea. All right, again, big concept with these 5 good emperors. They are very effective. They are excellent rulers, And they are the reason that the Pax Romana is considered one of the finest periods of world history, because of the accomplishments of what they do during their lifetime and what they do up until that point.
What were the reasons for that?
So basically, because Nerva allows them to pick the next successor, you get 5 amazing rulers. And without going into too much detail on what each ruler did, they are the reason that Pax Romana is considered to be the finest. All right, they are going to help us answer that question. Now, what they actually did, we'll get into. But that's the big idea. That's why we start with those terms there. Right? So Nerva says we should pick our ruler. He picks Trajan. The next 3 emperors after Trajan, all selected by the adoptive system. Now, why did you have to adopt them? Right? Goes back to this idea. You got to have that title of nobility. Trajan was a nobody. Right? Trajan did not have a title of nobility. Nerva was a senator. You had to be a patrician in order to be a senator. Therefore, Nerva had a title of nobility. So Nerva has to adopt him in order for him to be accepted by the patrician class. Right? The importance of that title. Just kind of referencing that again. What happens when we get to Marcus Aurelius and Commodus? Who is Commodus? Isabel? Marcus Aurelius' real son, right? His biological heir. And how could you summarize the reign of Commodus? Tammy?
After the session of the Pax Romana ended.
Yeah, he's literally the end of the Pax Romana, right? His reign is considered to be the end of the Pax Romana. So let's walk through this, right? You got Octavian. Octavian has biological heirs, not that good of rulers. Nerva comes along and says, let's pick our heir, 5 for 5, really good selections. Marcus Aurelius, considered by many to be the wisest emperor, because he's a Stoic philosopher. He literally writes books called the Meditations on Stoic philosophy. Okay. He decides, you know what? I've lost a lot of children. Like 8 of his kids had died by the end of his reign. He's like, I want my biological son to become the next emperor. Commodus has no interest in ruling. He's very much like Nero. He doesn't care. He thinks of himself as a gladiator. He wears lion skulls and carries around a club because he wants to dress up like Hercules. He wants to play make-believe. He's like, look, I'm Hercules. Right? And then Commodus, ironically enough, dies in gladiatorial combat. So if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, the last scene is actually historically accurate. Commodus did fight a gladiator, and Commodus did lose to a gladiator. Right? The rest of that movie is completely wrong. It's all fictional to lead to that point, but they used a singular historical event to try and be the climax of that movie. Right? This, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have done that, Marcus. Not a great idea, right? So we go from picking 6s, and then he rolls a 2. And it's like, well, no longer winning in that regard. So that is the political leadership. Now let's get into, so that if you're looking at your key term sheet, all right, that would be the second category. All right, the political leadership, it would be Julio-Claudian Flavian dynasty down through Commodus. Then the right side is going to be that third category. All right, the third category is what did they actually do once they actually had, once they're in the Pax Romana. Okay. Roman rule constructive. What does the word constructive mean? What does it mean to construct something?
Build it or make it.
Build it, right? Yeah. And what were they building? A laundry list of things. All of those things, you don't necessarily need to know the details of all those individual arrows. The reason I gave those to you is because that's what they were doing. They were doing a lot of different things. So the big idea is that they're building a lot of stuff, right? Things like their military is improving, their government is improving, their engineering is off the charts good. I mean, they're the first person to develop concrete, which is still amazing to me. Concrete's crazy. Did you ever think about that? You ever seen concrete before it's like hardened? It's like a mix of like soupy liquid, right? So it goes from this kind of gray soup to all of the buildings everywhere, forever. It goes from like this liquid to every road in America. It's pretty crazy. It's one of those, I mean, look at where we're sitting right now. We're 25 feet in the air. How is this building not collapsed? Right? Concrete's an amazing invention. The Romans came up with it first. That's why their buildings are still standing. Right? And there's a reason why that is, because they had volcanic ash that other parts didn't have. But yeah, it's quite amazing to me, at least personally. Right? Their roads, their harbors, their aqueducts, their baths, their sewage, their trade and travel, law and order, cities and urbanization. Right? They're spreading everything everywhere. They're building stuff everywhere throughout their entire empire. So they build roads to connect their empire and to be able to move their armies around. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you can move your army effectively, you can't have an insurrection. You can't have a rebellion that's successful. Like if you're looking at the map, so just follow with me for a second, right? Rome is here, right? Rome could move their military to anywhere in their empire in less than 10 days. That used to take Alexander 6 months to get from one end of his empire just to the middle of his empire. Rome can do it in 10 days. If you start an insurrection over here in Judea, the reason it doesn't work is because it doesn't take 3 months for the army to get there. They show up a week and a half later, and they're like, oh, you want to take over the city? Try us. If it took them 3 months, they might have been successful. So the roads are a pretty big connector, and it's used for the military, but it's also a pretty big connector in terms of trade, right? You can start standardizing things and spreading things out. Just to give you one brief example that demonstrates the connectiveness of Rome during this time period. They found roofing tiles in England that are the exact same, not similar, the exact same as the roofing tiles that they found in Carthage in North Africa, which are the exact same as they found in Judea, and the exact same they found in Greece, and the exact same that they found in southern Germany. They literally were spreading the exact same thing everywhere in their empire. So they connected their entire empire physically. They connected their entire empire physically. They also connected their entire empire in other ways. What happened to slaves during the Pax Romana, generally speaking? Jake?
Oh, they got like a better quality of living and could like become citizens, and there was less of them.
Okay, there was less of them because they're not expanding as much and they're freeing people, but that's not as important as the first point, right? They're treating them better, right? Their quality of life got better. Now that's important, but why? That's the more important thing, right? And I don't even know that your book directly addresses this, but let's just try and critically think about it for a second, right? So everything's getting better, their lives are improving, all that stuff is great, right? They're treating more humanely, you cannot cruelly punish and torture slaves. Good, that's a good thing. But why can you not? Yeah.
Because they gain citizenship.
Okay, they gain citizenship, right? Let's think about why the Romans would allow that. Let's go all the way back to 2.1. Okay, I want to draw direct lines of causality here. Yeah.
So I get more jobs.
Okay, so maybe they can have more jobs. If you create citizens, then you can create a new source of income, but that's not helping the people that don't have jobs. You're just giving jobs to the people that were slaves, right? But that's not wrong, and I like the logic, but let's follow this out for a second, right? They conquer Greece, right? After they conquer Greece, what happens?
They gain more slaves.
They get more slaves. What happens to Romans?
They become colonized.
They become Hellenized, right? Some of the Greek ideas start to permeate into Roman society. What is the primary philosophy of the Hellenistic age? I was going back a few weeks, right? But this is all, we're going to try and connect it all together. What is the primary philosophy of the Hellenistic age? Yeah?
Just don't worry about things that you can control.
That's what they thought. Yeah. What's it called? What's that school thought called? Yeah.
Stoicism?
Stoicism, right? Stoicism says don't worry about things that you can't control. And also, there's another tenet to Stoicism, right? There's another fundamental belief to Stoicism. We're all part of one collective humanity. Why? What characteristic do we have that allows us to be connected in this one community? Yeah,
We're all humans.
we're all humans. What makes us humans?
The ability to think.
Exactly, the ability to reason. Your ability to reason is the same as your ability to reason, which is the same as his ability to reason, which is the same as my ability to reason. And because we can all think rationally and reasonably, we are all members of humanity. So let's follow this out. They conquer Greece. Roman Stoic ideals that everybody's connected start to make their way into Rome. And then when we get to slaves and then women as well, this is the outcome of the Stoic influence, right? The reason that they start treating slaves better is because they are becoming Hellenized, because they are believing in Stoic principles, right? What happens to women? Right?
Like their living conditions are, like, they're allowed to own land and own property and like have wealth, even like if there's no man at the house or something.
Okay, so they gain more rights, right? Gain more equality, yeah.
They're allowed to start business without consent.
They're allowed to start businesses, right? Their fathers can't force them to marry anybody, so they're gaining rights. Why? What characteristic do women have? Yeah, they have the ability to reason. Even a slave has the ability to reason. Even a woman, which I know in the modern day, that sentence is a very outdated sentence, but for this time period, right? Even a woman has the ability to reason. That might not seem like a revolutionary thought, but that is a radical idea during the time of the Romans. In ancient Greece, women were not even allowed to leave their houses. If you go back to Athens, the democratic country, women could not go to the supermarket without a male escort. So if you're at home and you didn't have any food and you were hungry, tough it out until your husband gets back. You literally could not leave your domestic residence. Now in Rome, they not only can leave their homes and walk around, they can run businesses. Octavian's third wife, Livia, right? She is a very successful businesswoman. Why does that change occur? It comes from that idealistic philosophy of Stoicism, right? They redefine what the world is and one person's relationship to that bigger world. And in redefining it, and then once they start to Hellenize the Romans begin to achieve that idea, which leads us into the second to last term, the world community, right? Essentially, the Romans did it. They achieved the world community. They achieved the Stoic ideal of creating a unified world community. They achieved that Stoic ideal of connecting the world and connecting everybody together. And for their time period, Roman women had a relative sense of equality. I say relative because even until the 1900s, like it was in 1919 that women in America finally gained the right to vote. So it's not like automatically everything jumps forward, right? Civilization can go backwards too. That's what happens in the Middle Ages. But it's the start of that ball, right? It's the direct impact of the influence of Stoicism. Now, if we're looking at that last term, citizenship. They do extend citizenship to the conquered. They extend citizenship rights to freed slaves. Basically, anybody could become a citizen. If you were born in Spain, you could have the exact same rights as somebody born in Rome. If you were born in the Middle East or North Africa or Greece or Germany, in the Roman Empire, you could achieve political and legal equality. That is a transformative idea. Again, that's a radical concept. In ancient Greece, in Athens specifically, let's just stick with Athens, right? You could participate in their politics, you could participate in their democracy, but you had to be born in Athens, your parents had to be born in Athens, and your grandparents had to be born in Athens. Well, now in Rome, you don't even have to know what Rome is. You could never see, you could have the ability to never have seen Rome with your own two eyes. And you are a full-fledged Roman citizen. That is a radical idea. That's how they're able to unite their empire. So if we take that whole section, right, from Roman rule constructive all the way down to citizenship, here's the main big idea. Right, and I would record this if you don't have it already, right? The Romans connected their world physically, philosophically, culturally, and legally. The Romans connected their world physically by building things, philosophically with the influence of Stoicism, culturally by spreading those things around, and legally by extending citizenship rights to the conquered and to the freed slaves. So they connected their empire physically, philosophically, culturally, and legally. Now, in doing so, right, and this is the second part of that idea, in doing that, they achieved the Stoic ideal world community. They created what the Stoics wanted to create. So that idea of a world community cosmopolitanism, the Romans actually did it. That idea of a connected world community is still important to our world today. Right? Think of the United Nations. Think of the World Health Organization. Think about trade. How do you buy strawberries in the middle of December? Did you ever think about that? How do you buy strawberries in the middle of December? Strawberries don't grow in the middle of winter. Almost every banana you've eaten is from South America. How do you get avocados from Mexico in the middle of Chicago? Does that ever boggle your mind where things come from? It's amazing. We still have that principle. It's a still important principle, right? And it started with the Romans. They actually did it. They achieved that world community. Okay. And then the internet was invented, and now everything's even more connected. You can talk to people around the world. It's quite impressive. But anyway, that idea of a globalized world community starts with the Romans. Well, no, it starts with the Stoics, but then the Romans actually do it. The Stoics never created this unified world community. The Romans did. Okay. All right, next week we'll get into some more specific things about their culture and about their law, and we'll take a look at their entertainment systems. But those three are kind of the big ones. Excuse me. Why is the Pax Romana considered to be one of the finest periods of world history? Right? Because they achieved that Stoic ideal of that world community. How did they do it? Well, they had 5 really, really good emperors who preserved and then built on the accomplishments of Octavian Augustus. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay. All right. So I just want to make sure we're drawing those causal connections, because those are the important stuff. All the other stuff is just details, but as long as we conceptually build that understanding, we help.